Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a chance to have some coffee, tea, something to eat, and to refresh. So today's session is going to be around gender and disability in the CRPD and CEDA. I'll be chairing the session. My name is Stacey Scriver. I'm the Head of Discipline of Gender and Women's Studies in the School of Political Science and Sociology at the University of Galway. So today we have three speakers who are going to be talking on this topic. So I will briefly announce each of these, and they will then follow with their presentations, and we will then have time for questions at the end, finishing up in time for lunch. So our first speaker today is Teresa Degener from the Protestant University of Applied Sciences in Bochum. After that, we will have Sheila Agaro from the National Organization of Visually Impaired Empowered Ladies, NOVEL. Finally, we'll have Laura Serra from the University of Valladolid, and we very much welcome all of your presentations today. So without further ado, we will be starting with Teresa, and we look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you very much. It is an honor to be back in Galway. It is very hard to have this panel after this incredible keynote and response. Thank you so much, Amy and Rosalind. I remember reading Rosalind's autobiography, Unsettled, a couple of years ago, and I also was crying because it moved me so much. But today was another incredible session, and it's wonderful that younger women, I think, from the color of our hairs, I expect to be the oldest among us three disabled women. It's great to see younger disabled women taking over and being so powerful and having so important messages. So I am back in Galway 5 years later. In 2018, I had the honor to deliver the keynote for the 10th anniversary of the summer school. And I remember I spoke about intersectionality as a tool for social change. It was a very different world then. We had 5 years ago, we didn't have any idea about the COVID-19 pandemic. It was before the Russian war against Ukraine, before the terrorist Hamas attack against the Jews in Israel, which led to the terrible, terrible war in Gaza. But of course, it was not a world without war. There were 5 years ago, we already had the war in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Libya, Congo, and many other countries. And it was in 2018, it was my last year on the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability, where I was a member for 8 years. And the last 2 years, I was a chair as the only woman among 18 members. And it was a very busy time for me. And I'm happy that my time is much better today. I'm here with a colleague and 9 students. We lost one in the immigration zone. 9 students from our university in Bochum, Germany. Can I have a wave from the Bochum crowd? Yes, there you are. Thank you. And I'm happy to be back in Galway. And my presentation is on the intersectionality subject again. This time on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, and the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, CEDAW. Next slide, please. So I will start with my question. How are disabled girls and disabled women recognized in the CRPD and in the CEDAW? In CEDAW. Next slide, please. If we look at the CRPD text, we see a lot of articles mentioning either the word gender or sex or women. And it is in the preamble, we have the acknowledgement of multiple discrimination based on various grounds, among them sex. We also have disabled women specifically mentioned in the preamble. We have in the principles on Article 3 mentioned that gender and the equality between men and women is an important principle of this convention. We have a standalone article, Article 6, on women with disabilities, which acknowledges that women with disabilities are subject to multiple discrimination and that states parties have the responsibility to take measures for the advancement and empowerment of disabled women. We have disabled women mentioned in Article 8 on awareness raising, which talks about abolishing stereotypes, not only based on disability, but also gender stereotypes and harmful practices. We have Article 16 talking about freedom from exploitation and violence, and we all know that disabled women and girls are particularly affected by sexual violence, but also other forms of violence and exploitations. We have disabled mentioned in Article 25 on health. We have disabled women mentioned in Article 28 on the right to adequate standard of living, which mentions the duty of states to provide women with disabilities to access of poverty reduction programs. And we have in Article 34, where the composition of the CRPD committee is mentioned, and a text saying that it should be gender balanced. If we look at CEDAW, we see no mentioning of disabled women in any article. But we do have a general recommendation, number 18 of 1991 on disabled women. General recommendations are documents by the Human Rights Treaties, the committee, the CEDAW committee, or the CRPD committee, or any other human rights treaties which interpret the convention or parts of the convention, and they are highly authoritative statements. So general recommendation 18 on 1991 demands that state parties report on the situation of disabled women under CEDAW, and we have other general recommendations such as number 24 of 1999 on the right to health, and we also now have, since 2019, a CEDAW member who is disabled, and now the chair of the committee, Ana Peláez from Spain, who comes from the disability and women's movement, and also who has been a former CRPD member. So someone who has a lot of knowledge on disabled women. Next slide. So why is that CEDAW does not mention disabled women at all, whereas the CRPD has this twin-track approach to disabled women, which means having one standalone article, but also mainstreaming gender or sex throughout the whole text of the convention. If you look at the time span when these treaties were adopted, you can see there is almost 30 years between the adoption of CEDAW in 1979 and the CRPD in 2006. On this slide, for people who cannot see, I have put the 9 core human rights treaties on the slide, such as the convention, the Anti-Racist Convention, the Children's Conventions, and others. And we start in 1965 with the CERT, and then the CRPD is the newest convention. And if you look at the history of disability law within the United Nations and the history of disabled women within the United Nations, you can see that it took until 1990 until there was any mentioning of disabled women within the United Nations. In 1919, we had the first seminar of disabled women in Vienna, which was put up by several United Nations organizations, but also by strong disabled women active within Disabled People International. Anneli Joneken from Sweden, who has passed away, has been very strong, and she was also instrumental in getting CEDAW on track to addressing disabled women, for instance, already in 1991 with the General Recommendation number 18. Next slides, please. So I think if you want to have an answer to the question, which is the most important document, United Nations document on women with disabilities in the human rights sector or in the human rights system? The answer would be it is the General Comment number 3 of the CRPD Committee on Disabled Women, which was adopted by the CRPD Committee in 2016. And Anna Palas and myself and other women from the committee were very active on this general comment. And in this general comment, which is a long text of 12 to 15 pages, I guess, we identified 3 main subjects when it comes to the discrimination or the oppression of disabled women or human rights violation with respect to disabled women. And these 3 subjects are violence, discrimination, and reproductive oppression. And in relation to all these 3 main subjects, you find important text which interprets Article 6 of the CRPD Committee. Remember, that's the article which is the standalone article on disabled women under the CRPD. And in relation to this article, we interpreted the text of the Article 6 and said these are the 3 main subjects of human rights violations when it comes to disabled women. And with respect to violence, we in this comment you find text on stereotypes and harmful practices, and that violence is not only sexual violence, that there are various different forms of violence, that violence is not only behavior, like beating someone up, so like raping, but also institutional and structural. When it comes to this topic of discrimination, you'll find in the General Comment number 3 text on how is discrimination defined in the CRPD and the CEDAW. And you can see that the CRPD has a larger, a bigger, more extended definition of discrimination, because it also includes, for instance, the denial of reasonable accommodation, whereas in CEDAW you don't have that. If you remember, there is a 30-year difference almost between these treaties. But we said that the definition of discrimination has developed. It's a living instrument. Both instruments are living instruments. And we also talked a lot on intersectional discrimination, which means that discrimination not only tackles the gender or the disability the feature of our lives, but maybe also race or ethnic background or religion or sexual identity and sexual orientation. And we talked about what are the measures state parties have to take in order to help women develop, advance, and empower women with disabilities. As regards reproductive oppression, we gave many examples how are disabled women oppressed when it comes to reproductive rights, and forced sterilization and forced abortion among them. No access, women with disabilities often have no access to reproductive health services, and disabled women are more often than men denied choice and legal capacity. Next slide, please. When it comes to interpreting women's rights and disability rights, we often have the saying that there is a conflict between gender justice and disability justice. And Rosaline and Amy today already mentioned one, the care issue. When it comes to care, it often says that the ethics of care, which comes from the feminist philosophy, conflicts with the independent living philosophy of the disability movement. Another issue is abortion. Often when it comes to eugenic abortion based on the potential defect of the fetus, is a violation of the CRPD, and it's not seen as a violation of CEDAW. I want to tackle the abortion issue. And I want to tell you about a joint statement the CEDAW committee and the CRPD committee adopted in 2018. That was the last goal I wanted to achieve before I left the committee. I wanted to make sure that this is not seen as conflicting rights. Because if we understand human rights as universal and mutually reinforcing rights, and if we really believe in the sentence, no one must be left behind when it comes to human rights realization, then we can never interpret these conventions as conflicting with each other. So next slide, please. So in 2018, or in 2017, we started out, and with the help of this center, by the way, because before we had the adoption of the joint statement, we had a conference here, and I got a lot of important ideas and arguments from the Center of Disability Law and Policy, especially from Eleanor and Anna and others, who helped me to get this joint statement passed. And remember, I was the only woman among 18 experts on the CRPD committee when I started on this endeavor. And within the Office of Human Rights, Office of High Commission on Human Rights, everyone said, "You're crazy, Theresia, you're never gonna get that statement passed." Because when we started this statement, the debate about this statement, the flashback on the backlash on women's rights had already started. Abortion rights all over the world were reduced, and the main issue was we don't want the people who are against free choice for women to use that debate to even reduce women's rights even more. And I said, well, just let us try, and let us try to get one statement passed. And if you had studied, I have 4 minutes left, I need to hurry up, sorry, but if you had a look into human rights law on abortion at that time, you would find at least 10 human rights bodies within the United Nations saying that the denial of abortion based on the defect of the fetus is amounting to torture and inhuman and degrading treatment of women. And I found that, of course, offensive. And if you looked into the CRPD jurisprudence, you could also see that we accused Spain and Hungary and UK for having in their laws the possibility for what we call selective or eugenic abortion. So how do you reconcile these different issues? We did that by remembering that gender equality and disability rights are mutually reinforcing concepts. And that's what the first sentence we could write into this important statement. And then we also agreed on the principle that women's decisions about their own bodies are personal and private. And we need to, these decisions need to be protected by human rights. And then we also agreed on a third principle, which you'll find in this statement. Abortion laws must not perpetuate deep-rooted stereotypes, and stigma, and abortion needs to be decriminalized. And that was the agreement we could achieve. I mean, I personally wish we would have gone deeper. I wish there had been a statement saying that eugenic abortion is as bad as abortion based on sex or race. But that was not possible at that time. But also it was not politically wise. Because at that time, and still today, because we are not facing a time where abortion rights are extended, we are still having this backlash. I think that if we remember that all human rights are reinforcing, interdependent, and no one should be left behind, it does not bring any of us any help if we criminalize abortion on any ground. I know that we have this incredible, interesting debate later this week, so I will not give you my opinion on that issue now. I will hopefully, from the audience, take part in that discussion later on. But I think that there's a very easy solution on how do we reconcile this issue. But I think this statement just gives you an example how we can make sure that human rights do not conflict with each other, or that we do not let the disabled and the women's movement be used as now my English is going away, as conflicting parties. There is no such a thing. In the women's movement, there are disabled women, and in the disability movement, there are women with disabilities. And it's not that the women's movement is a non-disabled movement and the disability movement is a male movement, even though we have some dominance things there. Yeah, that's true. But I think the only way forward in these issues is to just remember and that there is my time is up. That there is a way to reconcile that conflict and to interpret human rights law as universal and interdependent, and that no one should be left behind. So with that, I stop here and thank you for your attention.
Great. So, Therese, I just want to thank you very much for that presentation and for the work that you have done, and for the important reminder of the interdependence and indivisibility of rights. So we're going to move on now to our second speaker. So Sheila Agaro, we welcome you and we'll hand it over to you now.
Good day. Hello? Yeah. Okay, good day everyone. I'm Sheila May Agaro, a woman with visual impairment from the Philippines. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I am so thrilled to share my organization's work and experience in writing and contributing to CRPD and CEDAW alternative reports. So it was in October of 2012 when we formed the nationwide organization of visually impaired empowered ladies, or NOVEL. At that time, voices of women with disabilities were rarely heard, let alone women with visual impairment. In meetings and events locally and abroad, there were instances that men with disabilities would even speak for us. And it is with conversations with fellow women with disabilities that we started realizing that the barriers and biases that we face based on our gender overlap with our experiences as persons with disabilities. So at the same time that NOVEL was launched, a milestone was also for the Philippine disability movement was also happening. The Philippine Coalition and the UNCRPD was formed, and they were writing the first civil society parallel report on the implementation of the government of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. NOVEL was invited to contribute and participate halfway through the project, so we kind of missed the capacity building sessions that other organizations had. And there was already a draft when we joined them. Despite being new to the movement and unfamiliar with the process, we were driven by our desire to be visible and to be part of the parallel report. So we provided comments and recommendations and focusing it on Article 6, which is on women with disabilities. Like some of the things that we highlighted were about the lack of data on Filipino women and girls with disabilities, having no separate commissioner representing persons with disabilities in the Philippine Commission on Women, the non-recognition of CRPD as a legal framework for the said commission, among others. 2 years after, in 2014, we were invited to be part of a diverse team of women who will produce a SIDO shadow report. So it's a bigger group. Novel at this point was part of a bigger disability group within a bigger women's movement, and we called ourselves Philippine Alliance of Women with Disabilities. The group consisted of women with visual impairment, wheelchair users, deaf women, women with chronic illness, and women with psychosocial disabilities. So before we delve into the SIDO shadow report writing, we had a coalition and capacity building together with other groups of women. And it was a very empowering experience for me. It was my first time to learn about intersectionality. And the process took 2 years, and then we finally had the report and submitted it to the SIDO committee. My colleague was chosen as part of the CSO delegation to Geneva. Unfortunately, despite completing all the supporting documents and following the rigid application process, her visa was denied. So we were very disheartened and confused as to what have caused the denial of her entry and appeal. But overall, though, it was a very great experience working alongside and being in solidarity with other feminist groups. We felt that we were no longer confined within the disability sector, but our issues and recommendations are being raised in the global feminist arena. And yeah, it was a great experience for us. So like fast forward in 2021, I joined the Inclusive Generation Equality Collective. It was a global network of feminists with disabilities working on the intersection of gender and disability. It was also the time I started collaborating with Women Enabled International, who was the convener of the collective. Um, with in like June 2023, Women Enabled reached out to us and asked if Novel is interested in submitting a SIDO shadow report, because last year was the time that Philippines uh, was scheduled to be reviewed, and we were very very excited, but actually we didn't know what to do. Unlike the other reports that took like more than 2 years to prepare, we only had 2 months to do it. So, but Women Enabled assured us that we can do it, and yeah, we gained the confidence to really push for it. Um, we there are a lot of issues for girls and women with disabilities in the Philippines, but we concentrated on pressing issues such as the issues of rural women with disability women and girls with disabilities, gender-based violence, access to justice, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and education. Um, the FGDs that we had students and teachers with disabilities, mothers with disabilities, a local village official with disabilities, and that experience, of course, we took into account the accessibility and support requirements uh, of the facilitators and the participants. It was very timely because the time we were also implementing a project supported by Madre Viva Girls, and it was about supporting the empowerment of women and girls with disabilities. So we also like, aside from the focus group discussions, we did this research, and it came the aside from like looking into the reliable internet sources, we also drew out from the different reports that we had, the CRP, the NCCDO shadow reports from the past, and also our SDG parallel report, and also the situation on the situation of women and girls with disabilities during the height of the pandemic. So yeah, after through Women Enabled Support, we were able to submit our report and beat the deadline in August of 2023. So, um, so Women Enabled said that, yeah, there's an opportunity to personally witness the review and lobby for the rights of Filipino women and girls with disabilities. So I did not hesitate. I grabbed the offer to be there in Geneva. Um, I connected with allies from the feminist movement and participated in the civil society meetings. um During the time, I wasn't sure if I will make it because I only had like 2 weeks to process the visa, and the requirements were very grueling. And coming from a developing country, you always have that nervousness within you that will they approve my visa. But luckily I got approved, and it was an advance birthday gift for me. So I was there in Geneva, and before the constructive dialogue, there were three important meetings that I had to go into. So the first one, we had a civil society meeting organized by International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific, and they walk us through the process of the CEDAW review and also like what to expect as part of the CSO delegation. I must say that it was one of the biggest challenges that I had during the entire process. There was a segment that we needed to choose who's going to speak and what area should be covered for the 11-minute public oral statement. And like everybody else, I wanted an airtime for my agenda, but I really struggled. I struggled balancing my agenda with maintaining good relationship with other Filipino CSO colleagues. Um, in the end, I didn't get a slot for women and girls with disabilities. It was hard, but I got nominated to speak for gender based violence and access to justice. What I did is I did side conversations and lobby to make sure that other resource persons would talk about disability in their own segments. So um everyone was an advocate, but you know that there's still a power dynamics coming into play. And okay, it's coming into play, and um it's not it wasn't really easy. um that you know, you would like these things to be said, but then people would tend to champion their own sectors. And some fellow CSO would cite that disability inclusion is cross-cutting, and naturally it would come out of the oral statement and the oral interventions. But we know that if things are not explicitly mentioned, particularly disability, it would be a continuous omission in the human rights discussions. So preparing for the oral statement was very stressful. I only had 90 seconds to say my piece, and I had to memorize my speech, so I will save time to do it. Um the following day, there was another private meeting with the CEDAW committee members. This time, I got my full 2 minutes to discuss my issues and recommendations as for Filipino women and girls with disabilities. But wait, there's more. So after the private meeting, Women Enabled was there all throughout to support me. And part of our strategy was to have a closer contact with the CEDAW committee members. So we patiently waited for them during their lunch break and trying to meet some of them. And so we went to them, gave our elevator speech on the status of Filipino women and girls, and gave them some questions that they can suggested questions that they can ask to the Philippine delegation. So my primary target back then was the committee member from Japan because she was the special rapporteur for the Philippines. And well, before talking to her, we wrote down the questions in on paper, and then um she also led us to the other committee members for the committee members from Sri Lanka and Nigeria, and I was so glad that they listened and they took my questions. And the following day, finally it was the day of the review, October 11, 2023, and it was a decisive moment. So Ana Pelaez was the chair of the SIDO committee, and she's a woman with disability. Somehow I felt it was a leverage because she was very critical of disability issues. Women with disabilities were kind of mentioned and asked around 9 times during the entire dialogue. And it was disappointing that the Philippine government did not have any representation from the National Council on Disability Affairs. And the times that they mentioned about disability, it was like the answers were kind of unclear and very disconnected. There were specific questions about women and girls with disabilities, but many times it was kind of lumped together with other groups of women like indigenous women, rural women, and LGBTQI plus women. So yeah, and uh, so after the dialogue, I had the chance to talk with Anna, and she was delighted to see me. We embraced, and she assured me that women and girls with disabilities would appear in the concluding observations and recommendations. So yeah, so the concluding observations and recommendations came out after like 3 weeks, and based on what I see on the document, like there were 14 mentions of women and girls with disabilities in the document. And of course, the role of my organization Novel is to monitor the implementation and of these recommendations. Something that I admit that we need to learn more and engage more. From this SIDO experience, I felt that there's a need. Preparation is the key. Could have been an earlier engagement with the CSO representatives and SIDO committee members, and but I think there's still a need for more work to be done in terms of disability inclusion in the mainstream feminist movement, and also with the government. They are women's activists, they are human rights defenders, but still there are many that are still unfamiliar how to work with people with disabilities and provide accessibility and reasonable accommodation. I'm so happy for the support that I got from Women Enabled International, from also with my Filipino CSO colleagues, but because of their presence and advice, I was able to thrive and lobby with among the civil society group, the government, and the SIDO committee. But more importantly, I'm so thankful with my colleagues in Novel. It's really a powerful experience for us. It's not perfect, but it was a powerful experience for us, and I'm so happy. It's kind of difficult to express, to describe how knowing that these stories are brought to the global feminist arena and now became basis for a more concrete recommendations to make their lives better, our lives better. So thank you so much. Mabuhay. Maraming salamat and happy Pride Month.
Wonderful, Sheila. Wonderful.
Sheila, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think what you've provided there is a really wonderful case study in how to get things done. So congratulations on that. I think you're also highlighting the importance, as well as the challenges of solidarity, the power of collective action, but also the ways in which it takes strategy, leadership, and a lot of perseverance. So again, thank you very much for that. So we now are moving on to Laura Sarah. So I'll hand it over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Teresia and Sheila. This was wonderful. And thank you for the co-directors for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here in this panel with these two powerful women. But particularly, I really like the structure of the program. And I want to think also about the craftivism that Emma explained, coming from the Global South, that is there, that the way that we can translate the knowledge. I'm talking about the arpilleras that Emma said about the women in Chile. I think is really important. And you're addressing from the beginning of the summer school things about intersectionality that are truly, truly important when we are addressing topics as gender and disability. So the way on how we translate the knowledge among the world is important. It's not everything on the books. And also I'm learning so much already. The keynote speaker and Amy, Rosalind and Amy, they were so powerful, so great. And I think they must go on tour with that conversation. And outside this space that maybe I think that we talk in the same language, but what happened outside or beyond disability rights spaces. So I think it's truly important, your talk, and Rosalind, how you articulate everything. I'm like Teresa said, it's really hard to say something after that, but I want to thank the co-directors to inviting me because I am already learning a lot. So the idea that I have for this presentation is to, I don't know if I'm going to respond to the question, but to how city obligations can be fulfilled without undermining the CRPD obligations. Or in another way, how can we integrate disability and gender rights to promote them in a more comprehensive manner as human rights? So the agenda that I have for today, very superficially, because I don't have too much time. I didn't put the clock, sorry. Because if not, yeah, there. So the agenda that I have for today is start, like I said, very superficially, just to set the context, the historical context and evolution of disabled women's rights in a very superficial way. And I wanted to bring two topics. There are kind of case studies, but are topics around sexual and reproductive rights, and go through them. To then go through how intersectionality is so important when we talk about disability and gender, and then to some conclusions that I have a question mark there because I have more questions than conclusions. And I would love to hear, Teresa said that she has an easy solution. I would love to hear that because for me it's not easy. But anyway, I would love to, because I know that we have a lot of time to discuss with the audience, so I would love to discuss with you that. So, like I said, very superficially, the historical context, we all know how, and Rosalind and Amy make that very clear, the historical marginalization, the invisibility of disabled women, that this translates not only to the legislation, but also culturally, and the norms, and cultural expressions and norms, the oppression, this is not just isolated discriminations, but there is a history of oppression, and how, because of disabled women, now maybe the legislation might be more inclusive. So I'm not going through all the slides, but I wanted to just, it's very interesting how it is Marion Young said this different sides of the oppression, but she has one that it calls paradoxical oppression, that is at the same time you are being stereotyped and invisible. So I think that is what happened when we talk about disabled women history from a legal perspective, if you want. So, like Teresa said, the CEDAW was adopted in 1979, so it's not that we were talking in 2006, like the CRPD does not address, like Teresa said, explicitly the unique challenges of disabled women. They have only one article about, they have only one article about specifically a social group of women that are rural women, but only that. And I think that this lack of inclusion was really, really significant, but it also came with the landscape at the moment, because they were left out on the disability rights as well, and on the gender rights also. So there is a very interesting study of 2018 that assessed the UN effectiveness in incorporating disability rights before and after the adoption of the CRPD. And on the case of CEDAW, they only began to mention the word disability mainly after the adoption of the CRPD. Although, as Teresa has been saying in her presentation, there is a general recommendation of 1991 that they talk about disability rights. So the term multiple discrimination related to disability on CEDAW appeared in 2006 in some concluding observations. From 2009 and onwards, CEDAW has recommended positive measures like affirmative actions to support women with disabilities. And I think that CEDAW has shown significant, the CEDAW committee I'm talking about, has shown significant capacity to mainstream the rights of women with disabilities. And this is, we can see that in several concluding observations. But I think that there is a lack of consistency in these efforts. Usually it's the same measure, like please give us disaggregated data, we need, but it's always the same, or as Sheila was saying, they are with among other social groups. So it's usually the same formula what they are requiring. So the two topics that I want to bring here to the table, just to see them very superficially, and then maybe we can talk about afterwards in the Q&A, was menstrual health and the access to safe and legal abortion. So there are not these two rights that we are going to see how are they human rights. They are not explicitly listed among the CEDAW obligations. There are not clear references or allusions, but I think that these two rights are encompassed within the preamble and Article 12 that address the right to health and access to healthcare. And Article 14, like, as I said, is about rural women, and Article 5 regarding the elimination of prejudice. So I think that addressing menstrual health and ensuring access to safe and legal abortion are critical components of gender equality and women's rights. And if we can integrate these issues within the CEDAW framework, this will reinforce the commitment to eliminate discrimination and promoting more comprehensive health rights for women globally. So about menstrual health, I'm very passionate about this topic. It's true there is a lot of new legislation that is talking about menstrual health, but not as a human right, and it is a human right. But I think that despite the silence on menstruation, the CEDAW and the CRPD as well offer opportunities for reform on domestic legislation. But there is an omission mainly on menstruation in human rights treaty and bodies. It is true that the general comment about Article 6 on the CRPD kind of set the pace on this topic, but they talk more about menstrual health as something of hygiene and not as a human right. And recently, the WHO in 2022 recognized menstrual health as a health and a human right issue. And this is very important, and it marked like a paradigm shift in this topic because it's crucial. We're not talking about, it's beyond something hygienic. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but it's it talking about accessibility, privacy, integrity, autonomy. So it's a human right issue. And this is because of the collective, because of the activism of menstrual health groups. So it's because of them. So there are unique challenges and stigma that are not addressed in domestic legislation when they talk about menstrual health. Usually when we talk about menstrual health, they're talking about affordability. So it's like the period poverty legislation. So, but there are unique challenges and stigmas among disabled women. Like there are unfunded, 2 minutes, assumptions about their ability to manage and conceal the menstruation, lack of guidance for caregivers, insufficient education, and of course the stigmatization lead to restrictive practice. And the former special rapporteur has a very good report on this, and how these practices are not only sterilization, but other methods that they use to basically cut your period. So, yeah, there is a prevailing social narrative emphasizing like the individual empowerment and autonomy, but might unintentionally marginalize the experience of menstruators with disabilities. So I think that when Sita mentioned menstruation, they talk about menstruation in the workplace, emphasizing the need to eliminate discrimination, but they don't. There is no specific criteria for addressing the challenges on menstruation, and of course there is very vague requirement for information on what is happening to disabled women. Well, I don't think that I have time to address the abortion issue. I would love to discuss this with Teresia, and to all of you, with all of you. But yeah, basically, what sorry, I have two things here. It is good to know that abortion issues is not. The formula cannot be the same for every country. When I came here to Ireland, they were talking about they have to mainly, because we have here, for those who cannot see, there's two photographs. One is from Sevilla, that she died here in Ireland, and another one is Ana Maria Acevedo, that she died in Argentina, one of 1,000 women that died before we have the legal framework. But it's not only the thing that I have to travel to another country. If you are lucky enough to afford that travel, but it's your human dignity, and the right to life that is in stake. So I think that the Human Rights Committee, that I would love to discuss this with you, Teresa. It took 2 years to draft the General Comment number 36, and I think what the CRPD committee did was, at the beginning, the CRPD committee, in the concluding observations that Teresa mentioned, they were saying that this ground that Teresa was talking about, the fetal or fatal impairment, was a discrimination against disabled people. But I think that they articulated better when you did the draft to the when you did the submission to the draft of the Human Rights Committee, because you went there not only addressing Article 5 but also Article 8, yeah. And I think that was better. I think the way you articulated this was more understandable to the people that don't talk the same language disability rights activists or human rights defender, but specialized in disability rights talk. So I think it's more, in a more comprehensive manner, I think was very well articulated. And here we can have the debate. So I wanted to put for those who cannot see, there are 3 photographs of Trump, Milei, that is the president of Argentina right now, and Meloni, that she's a woman, but she's very, very conservative. But what I want to say with these photographs, there is a conservative backlash on sexual and reproductive rights. So as I said, we need to see not only for be very strategic. So not only what it needs, but also to whom we are saying that. So the context and not only the content, but also the context. And I think intersectionality could be the frame of the answer. I will not stop here, but usually when we talk about intersectionality, the problem is not what it is, but the means that we need to address intersectionality and to go to a transformative quality that I think is the goal here. So I had a lot of questions. I'm sorry, because I don't have the time. Is CEDAW undermining the CRPD of disabled people in their concluding observation? Is the CRPD undermining the CEDAW and women's rights in their concluding observations? Legal grounds are there for a reason, because politically sometimes it's impossible to, the ideal will, about abortion I'm talking about, the idea will be a legislation without any grounds, but sometimes there is a need to have grounds because, like I said, we need to see the landscape, the social, political, and legal landscape. So is this ground of fatal impairment contrary of the CRPD obligation? Is CEDAW being arbitrary against the CRPD by enacting states that at some point it did to decriminalize abortion, at least on this ground? So I think that we might need to answer these questions from an intersectional perspective, but really using intersectional perspective. Intersectionality is not about identities. Intersectionality, it is about the factors of oppressions. So it's about, like Rosalind and Amy said, the sexism, the ableism, the racism, the structural poverty. So it's not the formula would not be the same for Sweden than from a country from the global south or Latin America is the countries that I know. So yeah, I think that we have to ensure not to impose concepts from the global north onto the global south, but rather understand and respect the unique landscape, as I said, legal, social, and political system. As Teresa was saying, securing access to abortion and working to reduce negative stereotypes around disability must not be in conflict. But maybe the last question that we can ask ourselves is: do we need to balance the rights to life of the pregnant person against the stigmatization of disabled people and potentially their right to live with dignity? Okay, this was a longer presentation, but I know that we don't have too much time, but I will love to discuss this with you and with the online audience. So, gracias, thank you.
So, Laura, thank you so much for that. I think it's one of the value of having these kinds of spaces is being able to bring forward issues and topics that don't get enough attention in other spaces. And the issue of menstrual health is something that has been largely invisible for all women for a long period of time. More recently, it has started to get more attention, and yet the unique challenges of people with disabilities still remain under-recognized within those discourses. So that importance of, we'll say, menstrual equity for all is so key as are kind of bringing out these discussions in spaces like this. So thank you very much for that contribution. Yeah. And thank you to all three of our speakers again for really giving us lots of food for thought and allowing us now space for the next half hour or thereabouts to be able to bring your questions to our speakers and have a bit of a question and answer. So the way that we'll do this is that we can take a couple of questions at a time and then give our speakers a chance to respond, and then we'll take another round if we have time for that. So if you would just like to raise your hand or make note, someone will come to you. And for those who are joining us via Zoom, you can add any questions you would like into the chat or the Q&A.